Hello, and thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, an educator, writer, history nerd, and novice investigator. Each week on the show, we will learn about interesting parts of Texas history, from battles and historical figures to the odd and enchanted. Hi guys, welcome back to Texas History for Kids, Episode 3. Today's episode will take you through a few Texas ghost towns, and we'll talk about how they came to be ghost towns. Did you know that Texas is home to over 800 ghost towns? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and talk about what a ghost town is not. It is not some fantasy town where Scooby-Doo and his friends go to investigate and find scary ghosts hanging around at the cemetery. Ghost towns are cities or towns that do not exist anymore, or there might not be many people that live there anymore. What made them a ghost town? Well, some have been destroyed, some might have been blown away, some are underwater, or some have just been abandoned altogether. Either way, they are an interesting mark in the Lone Star State's history. Quick check. Why is Texas called the Lone Star State? Hint, you might want to take a look at our state flag, which is coming up in another episode, by the way. All right, so the first ghost town we are talking about today is Lobo, Texas. Lobo, L-O-B-O, had lots of wolves that inhabited the land around it. Naturally, they named the town Lobo, which means wolf in Spanish. In the 1800s, it was a popular town because it was the only one around for many miles that actually had water nearby. It was once a thriving town known to have sources of underground water where people could tap into the water tables and get water from the wells. Remember, when our state was first started, people were looking to settle their homes near a location that had lots of resources that would meet their needs, such as nutrient-rich soil for planting food and water sources like rivers and lakes. They did not have water that came into their homes in pipes like we do today. They didn't have faucets for running water. And of course, bottled water was out of the question in those days. Since the town of Lobo had water, it was also a source of cotton crops. Farmers and settlers were able to grow their cotton in Lobo, which was a great way to make money at the time. Again, people couldn't just go to Walmart in those days and buy their clothes. They had to grow their own cotton, which was then used to make clothes, coverings for their wagons, bed sheets, blankets, and many other things. In the 1960s, Lobo's water wells dried up due to severe drought. Drought is when there is no rain for a long period of time, and then the places where the water once was becomes just dried up dirt. Since farmers weren't able to use the water for their crops, homes and businesses, and most of the townspeople were forced to move on to larger cities in Texas to make their homes. Also, because of the drought and less water and all the people moving away, Lobo became an abandoned ghost town in 1991. In 2001, a man and a few of his friends bought the town of Lobo for $20,000. The whole town of Lobo is only about 10 acres, and all that remains is a motel, an empty swimming pool, and just a few houses. Guys, $100,000 is not a lot of money for an entire town. It's actually less than the price of some houses, depending on where you live. But wouldn't it be neat to own an entire town? We're going to move on to the Texas coast to our next ghost town. Indianola, Texas was once one of the most important Texas ports along the Gulf of Mexico. It was established in 1846 by Sam Addison White and William M. Cook. This town has a sad history, though. It was mostly formed because the ships sailing west in search of new lands were forced to stop in Indianola. Many Europeans had contracted diseases while on the boats during their journey, so they were forced to stop and settle their families or face death. So that's what they did. In 1856 and 1857, the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, brought camels into Indianola to transport military supplies throughout the U.S. By 1870, it had become a military depot or a place where soldiers were waiting to be discharged or moved to other locations in the war. Indianola was a bustling town in 1875, one of the busiest ports in Texas for European immigrants. There were over 5,000 people living in Indianola, and the town had up to 4 newspapers. Newspapers were big in those days. The town suffered many setbacks throughout the years. Later, in 1875, a hurricane flooded Indianola and almost completely destroyed it. The town was rebuilt for a while. Then, 11 years later, another hurricane hit and just obliterated the town. Little was left of Indianola. By 1887, all those who had survived the hurricane moved to nearby towns like Victoria or Port Lavaca because the Southern Pacific Railroad had bought out the property of the Morgan Lines, which had been headquartered in Indianola since the 1850s, had moved its railroads to Port Lavaca. So there was virtually no reason for people to pass through Indianola anymore since Port Lavaca was now a major seaport. Today, Indianola sits near Matagorda Bay, where a few fishing cabins remain. There are about 100 people still living in Indianola. The Zimmerman Cemetery and a local marina are still open. You can also visit Indianola Beach Park for fishing, bird watching, and it's even one of the few places in Texas where you can actually camp for free still. We are going to move on to another town that's just north of Austin, called Old Bluffton, Texas. In the 1800s, many people called Bluffton home because of its proximity to water, very similar to the other towns we just talked about. The Buchanan Dam was built to bring electricity to Bluffton. I know what you're thinking. Why would they have electricity near water? Those two things don't mix, right? Well, even today, many electrical plants are built on water because the moving water captures energy, and that energy is then used to move other objects, like a generator that is used to create power. So, back to the Buchanan Dam. People build dams to control where the river water flows to make sure the right amount is at the right place at the right time. River water rises behind dams, which then forms man-made lakes called reservoirs. The lake water can be used to generate the electricity or supply water for homes and cities. The Buchanan Dam held water that was necessary to power the cities of the Texas Hill Country. Many of the residents who already lived in Bluffton had actually agreed to build the dam in efforts to save the town from the Colorado River. Fun fact, the Colorado River just so happens to be the 11th longest river in the United States and the longest river in all of Texas. Okay, so back to Lake Buchanan and the town of Bluffton. Because residents were so scared the Colorado River would flood Bluffton, people who lived there knew they had to make a move. About 50 Bluffton families sold their land to the River Authority and moved their homes further upland along the town cemetery. More than 300 graves were moved from the old Bluffton Cemetery to a new one a few miles west. When the dam was built, Lake Buchanan was formed. It fully submerged thousands of acres of land, including pecan orchards, cornfields, and pretty much anything that was left in Bluffton. The dam's power brought electricity, running water, and plumbing into homes of the Texas Hill Country by the early 1930s. No doubt having all of these great things made life so much easier for the surrounding areas. But what a price to pay for those residents who had to give up their own town for others to have a better way of life. 50 years later, in 1984, severe droughts caused the water in Lake Buchanan to recede, and what was left of Bluffton could be seen again. Pieces of houses, tombstones, and even parts of the bank and hotel had been somewhat preserved underwater all those years and can still be seen today. Texas is rich in resources that were used to build the country. In the 20th century, oil and coal were discovered, and railroads began popping up all over. Many people flocked to Texas in hopes to find work. Because the railroad was being built and towns were now being connected, where it used to take months to travel by horse and buggy, it was now only taking weeks by railroad. And did I mention the large amount of water Texas has? Texas is home to 7,000 lakes and 14 major rivers. No wonder why so many people chose to stay and live here. Unfortunately, natural disasters and booming industries are the number one causes of ghost towns. Well, today you learned about 3 Texas ghost towns. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And perhaps you might want to discover other Texas ghost towns on your own. This week's question is, what other problems could cause a town to become a ghost town? Send an email to michellegallegos.author@gmail.com and let me spell it out for you. michellegallegos.author@gmail.com, and I might feature your answer in an upcoming show. If you or your child has received valuable information, please share the show with others who might find it interesting. Are you an educator looking for a way to engage your students in more learning or comprehension skills? Did you know that most of my podcasts have a link to free resources for listeners? Students can listen during waiting periods, and I have great activities for those fast finishers. Head on over to my website for all the free goodies, michelleauthor@gmail.com, and that's Michelle with 2 L's. Remember, yesterday is today's history.